It's 170,000 years ago. You're a human, standing on a cold plain at dawn, and you're wearing pretty much nothing. No thick fur of your own, just bare skin against the wind, and a lot of goosebumps that aren't doing a thing to help. Here's the strange part. The human body had been like this for a very, very long time already. Almost naked, almost hairless. For roughly 1,000,000 years before that cold morning, our ancestors woke up freezing and just sort of dealt with it. Nobody reached for a coat because the idea of a coat hadn't been invented yet. Which raises a question that sounds simple and really isn't. When did we finally start wearing clothes? And why on earth did it take so long to get around to it? This is the story of the first clothes. And the biggest clue we've got doesn't come from a shirt or a fossil or a cave painting. It comes from a tiny bug that lives in the seams of your clothing. And here's the thing. The trail only gets stranger from here. By the end of this, getting dressed is going to land completely differently. But first we've got to deal with the naked part. Because that's the real mystery here, and almost nobody stops to notice how odd it actually is. Go back far enough, and our ancestors were covered head to toe in hair, the way apes still are today. Then, somewhere along the line, we lost it. Nearly all of it. And that loss didn't happen recently. It happened shockingly early. Scientists can actually date this using a gene that controls skin color. The logic's clever. Once the hair goes, bare skin has to turn dark to survive the sun, or it burns. So the moment the skin went dark is roughly the moment the fur went away. And that genetic change was already ancient history by the time our story starts, finished and done more than 1,000,000 years ago. So picture that. Way back in deep time, our ancestors were already walking around with dark, bare, sweating skin. There was a good reason for it, too. A naked body is a wonderful way to dump heat when the job of the afternoon is chasing dinner across a baking savanna until the animal drops from exhaustion first. Fur traps heat. Skin lets it pour off. We handed over the coat in exchange for the power to sweat and keep going, and it was a fine bargain, right up until the weather changed on us. And then we started to wander. Out of the warm places into colder ones. Up into Europe, up into Asia, into winters the human body had never met. And a body that's brilliant at shedding heat turns out to be terrible at holding on to it. This is the moment clothing stops being about style and becomes about staying alive. But here is the nightmare for anybody trying to find the first clothes. Clothing is made of skin and fur and plant fiber. Soft, perishable stuff. And the whole lot of it rots. Bury a leather cloak, wait long enough, and you dig up nothing at all. A dark smudge in the dirt, if you happen to get lucky. Bone survives, and so does stone, but a worn hide simply does not. No actual garment from that deep in the past has ever been found. Not a single one. So we can't just dig up the answer. And for a long time that felt like a brick wall. The thing we most wanted to put a date on had quietly turned to dust, no matter where anyone looked. And then somebody had a genuinely strange idea. If the clothes are gone, they asked, what used to live inside the clothes? And the answer is the louse. Yes, the louse. That itchy little thing that gets kids sent home from school. It turns out this tiny passenger is secretly among the best clocks we've got for reading our own past. And to see why, here's the thing you've got to know first. There are a couple of very different kinds of them. There's the head louse, which lives up in the hair, where it's always lived. And then there's the body louse, which is a different beast. It feeds on the skin, sure, but when it's time to lay eggs, it goes somewhere very specific. Not on skin, not in hair. It lays them in clothing. The body louse literally can't finish its life cycle without cloth to nest in. No clothing, no body louse. It's that clean. Which means the animal couldn't have existed at all until clothing did. It's a parasite that had to sit and wait for us to invent its house before it could even show up in the world. And that's the trick of it. Pin down when the body louse split off from the head louse, and you've basically dated the invention of clothing itself. The bug becomes a timestamp for a thing that rotted away long ago. And we can read that split because it's written into the louse's DNA. So a research team with a scientist named Melissa Toops as the lead author on the study did exactly that. They read the genes of these lice, compared how far the two kinds had drifted apart, and ran the molecular clock backward to the moment they split. Their single best estimate landed around 83,000 years ago, but the fuller picture reached deeper still, with a middle value closer to 170,000. And here is where an honest video has to slow right down, because this is where it gets messy. That estimate is not a clean, sharp date. The window the DNA actually allows is enormous, smeared across hundreds of thousands of years, and other studies land in different spots inside it. The clock ticks, but it ticks softly, and reading it is closer to squinting than to checking a watch. So the louse does not hand over a birthday. What it hands over is a neighborhood. Regular, everyday clothing, worn often enough to give a parasite a permanent home, somewhere in that long, fuzzy window, very roughly 100,000 years ago, give or take a good deal in either direction. It is wild, and it is frustrating, and it is completely honest all at once. Now, could we back it up with something you can actually pick up and hold? As it happens, we can. On the Atlantic coast of Morocco, in a cave called Contrebandier, archaeologists pulled a set of bone tools out of layers dated between about 90,000 and 120,000 years old. And these weren't random splinters of bone. They were carefully shaped, smooth tools of a very particular type, the exact sort you drag across an animal hide over and over until it softens into wearable leather. Dozens of them, made on purpose, used hard, tossed aside when they wore out. Nobody shapes dozens of the same specialized tool by accident. This was a routine, worn smooth by repetition. The animal bones sealed it. Foxes, jackals, wildcats. Small animals with gorgeous fur and honestly not much meat on them. The cut marks showed they'd been skinned, carefully, for their coats, not chopped up for a meal. Somebody there wanted the fur and knew exactly how to peel it off clean. So more than 90,000 years ago, humans were basically running a little workshop for turning wild animals into wearable fur. That's not some lucky guy with a stray pelt. That's a craft. The right tools, the right animals, the same steps handed down across generations. These people knew what they were doing, and they'd clearly been doing it a while. And here's a twist that catches most folks off guard. We weren't the only humans pulling this off. Over in Europe, the Neanderthals were working hides too. They used smooth rib bone tools called lissoirs. And get this, it's the same kind of tool leather workers still reach for today. Ours has not really improved on the design since. And their leather tools are older than the day our species even arrived in Europe, more than 40,000 years back. So covering the body wasn't a genius move that belonged to us alone. A separate species of human, off on its own path, reached for the very same answer to the very same cold. Separate kinds of people, reaching the same good idea, arrived at twice. Now, everything so far is draped clothing. A skin thrown over the shoulders, wrapped, tied off, good enough. Warm, but loose and drafty. There's a final invention that changes the whole game, and it shows up a lot later. It's small, it looks boring, and it ranks among the most important things anybody ever made. The needle. A needle with an eye in it means thread, and thread means you can sew a hide to the exact shape of a body. Sleeves, closed seams, a collar that actually seals shut. Clothing that traps a layer of warm air right against the skin, instead of flapping open every time the wind picks up. The oldest eyed needles anyone's found run to about 50,000 years old. And that's the whole difference between barely surviving a cold night and strolling through an ice age like it's nothing. Draped fur keeps you breathing. Fitted, sewn fur lets you march into country that would have flat out killed a bare ancestor, then stay there and raise kids there. The needle didn't just make better clothing, it quietly redrew the map of where humans were able to live at all. So put the whole thing together. For ages almost beyond counting, naked and dark and built for the heat. Then, somewhere in a wide, fuzzy window, we started covering up, and a little parasite crept into the seams to prove we'd done it. We scraped fur into leather on separate continents, Our kind and the Neanderthals both. And finally, we learned to sew and stepped into the cold on purpose. And the thing that sticks with me is what clothing quietly grew into. It started as a second skin against the wind, plain and simple, a way to not freeze to death overnight. But it refused to stop there. The fur somebody wore began telling the group who they belonged to. A certain pelt marked the hunter. A certain color marked the elder. The stitching said who made it and how much they cared about the person it was for. Long before there were cities or writing or money-changing hands, the thing on your back was already quietly announcing who you were and where you stood before a word was ever spoken. You got dressed this morning without giving it a thought, but you were repeating something almost 200,000 years deep, invented by cold, bare, shivering people who had no clue they were starting anything at all. The first person to pull a hide over their shoulders wasn't making a fashion statement. They were just trying, desperately, to make it to spring. So here's the thing I keep coming back to. If you woke up on that cold plain tomorrow, hairless and shivering, with nothing but a fresh animal hide and no clue what to do with it, would you have figured it out? Be honest. Let me know down in the comments.